Welcome to our webinar on discussing race and racism in the workplace. My name is Seth Green, and I lead the Baumhart Center at Loyola University Chicago, and we focus on how business can be a partner in delivering on Loyola's broader mission of social justice. Today, we are exploring the role of business in addressing the most important social justice issue in our country, systemic racism. And I want to say out loud that this is a topic that was equally urgent 1 month ago before the killing of George Floyd, and for that matter, 400 years ago, when European colonizers brought the first known enslaved Africans to North America. And I also want to say that the ventures that brought those slaves were called businesses. And so core to business, as we know it in this country, is racism. And the lingering effects of that are absolutely embedded in business today. I want to be equally clear that we are only going to scratch the surface of the massive transformation that our country and our economy needs to move toward a more just world and undo over 400 years of systemic racism. We believe that businesses and organizations have a critical role to play in addressing these issues. And the first step we know is being able to openly and effectively discuss race and racism. And so that's where we begin today, as we know that more people, thankfully, are reckoning with this topic in our country. In this webinar, we will explore how businesses and nonprofits have openly approached these conversations in the workplace and offer guidance from experts and leaders on how to structure workplace conversations on race and racism. If you go to the next slide, you see on the screen the overview of our agenda. We're going to start with a welcome from our dean, Kevin Stevens, and then we're going to hear from two experts, Tanja Coleman and Scott Hoseman, and then we're going to hear three case studies, one from a nonprofit, United Way of Metro Chicago, one from a for-profit, Wavemaker, and one from an association, Prospanica Chicago. Let me turn it over to Dean Stevens to welcome all of you.
Thank you, Seth. It is a pleasure to be here. I was born and raised in Chicago on the west side in the Austin neighborhood, and remember all too vividly what a scourge racism was and is. It is in Chicago particularly has been the driver of so much pain and sorrow and poverty. It's past time to do something about systemic racism. At Loyola, Anna Quinlan, we are deeply committed to social justice. And just last week, all the deans met with our new provost to decide on a common theme for the next several years that's going to bind together all the units of the university, teaching and research. And that theme is racism. We could all use help from a number of sources. So I'm here to pledge the support of the Quinlan School of Business in whatever way we can. We need to figure out how we can be a business school who can really help Chicago and the business community openly discuss and meaningfully address systemic racism. And for that matter, within the Quinlan School of Business, I know that we have our own instances of racism within the school. So what can we do as a school to address those issues? I am here, and many of my faculty are here on this webinar to learn from our experts, to learn how we could be better people, how we can be worthy of the mission of Loyola University and its commitment to social justice. So thank you, Steph, for organizing this so important panel.
Thank you, Kevin. And we're now going to move to our experts, Tanja Coleman and Scott Hoseman. So you are receiving wisdom, and I'll turn it over to them in a moment, from two people that have more than 4 decades of combined expertise. Tanja has worked as a senior level human resources and organizational development professional in nonprofit and Fortune 100 companies, including Microsoft, Starbucks, Tribune Company, Whirlpool, Sears, the YWCA, and Motorola. Currently, she is president of Reimagine Development Organization, where she provides clients with solutions focused on culture, leadership, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Dr. Tanja, as she is lovingly called by our students here at Loyola, is a faculty member teaching in our Baumhart Scholars MBA and our about to be launched Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Institute. And she is also a widely respected scholar with numerous best paper awards from the Academy of Management. And as you will hear, Scott brings similarly impressive experience to the table. He has spent the last 23 years of his career in the DEI consulting space. He and a senior team of partners founded Inquest in 2011 to drive more progress and tangible results for their clients. And today, Inquest partners with some of the world's largest brands, such as Toyota, Bayer, USAA, and FedEx. Scott, as you will see in a moment, is a dynamic speaker, having given keynotes in more than 10 countries. He's also an executive level facilitator and moderator who pushes leaders to have their DEI actions and behaviors match their words and good intentions. He is also a close friend of the Baumhart Center, having spoken at numerous events and courses, and is an advisor to our DEI Institute launching this fall. As consultants, Tanja and Scott have seen from the inside the good, the bad, and the ugly as corporations have attempted to address DEI. We've asked them to keep it real today, to be radically candid with us, and to direct with what they are seeing, especially over the last 3 weeks. Specifically, we've asked for their insights and guidance on how organizations are addressing race and racism conversations on 2 levels. First, they're going to talk about within their broader organizations for all employees. Second, they're going to talk about within senior leadership teams. Tanja, I'm going to turn it over to you to get us started.
All right. I'm happy to be here this afternoon. So, all right. So in terms of why you all have joined us today, you really want to know what needs to happen. We are where we are, and where do you need to go, and what do you need to do in order to start activating some conversation and some dialogue. And I came up with a real simple model, which is listen, learn, and leverage. And most of the time you see the model of listen and learn, but then after you learn, what do you do with the information? I think the distinction in what we're seeing today in our society is you want to leverage
Tanja, we lost you there briefly on sound. There we go. We have you again.
Okay. So I don't think. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep, we hear you. Go for it.
Okay. I hear it.
Muted.
I'm going to shut.
Unmuted.
Do you want to take over, because I hear
move to Scott Hoseman. If it's okay, Scott, we'll move to your slides and we're going to come right back to Tanja afterward. Oh. All right, well, bear with us. We are going to have this be an excellent webinar. We do not mean to keep you in suspense. Let's see, Scott. Tanja, can we try one more time with you and then we'll keep moving, or should we go to Scott?
Okay, I think this is better.
We've got it. Okay, let's go back to Tanja's slides. We're going to start again. Everyone give us, those 2 minutes back in your minds mentally. Let's go to Tanja and we'll have a great discussion from here.
Absolutely, we'll pick up. So one of the things that I was talking about is the model of listen, learn, and leverage. And what I've seen in the past is the listen and learn model, but now with the time that we're in, we have to think about how we can activate, how we can leverage against what we've heard and then what we've learned. And so Scott is going to talk a lot more in detail about the mechanics of listening, what good listening is, because we all think we're good listeners, but invariably, oftentimes we're not good listeners. So Scott is going to give us a lot more detail into that. In terms of learning, what I have been immersed in the last 3 weeks is listening sessions with organizations at various levels. So from senior leadership to entire teams, entire organizations with all their team members. And the one thing I've heard consistently in the learn category is people asking for information, for resources. How can I understand what's going on better? What book should I read? What paper should I read? And oftentimes, this is a wonderful effort to become immersed and learn and engage, but then people feel put on the spot in terms of, well, I can recommend a book, but that doesn't mean that every other person of color would recommend the same book. So as far as learning, I would say really take the bull by the horns, go out there, find information that you want to learn about, find the information in the category that you're interested in and read it versus giving others the burden of trying to give that information to you. Also, with leveraging what you've heard and what you've learned, you want to be able to make reasonable decisions and assessments from that, but also think about how does this information that you've learned, that you've heard, that you've read about manifest itself in the workplace? How can you take that information and bring it to the workplace and help build a culture that's reminiscent of most of the value systems and mission and vision statements that you read across organizations, but really when you peel the onion back, there's some pieces in there that's not being leveraged or not being activated upon. Okay, next slide, please. So one of the main mechanisms that a lot of organizations are using right now is what I call kind of culture and listening tours or sessions. These are generally done with facilitators. We recommend always a safe space for discussion. Our safe space now happens to be virtually, and that's okay. That's the only option we have. But even in those virtual spaces, we want a no judgment zone. And oftentimes when you're virtual, you might not be aware of your facial expressions or how you're coming across on video. And that can make the space feel like it's being judgy versus non-judgment. So you definitely want to make individuals aware that it's a no judgment zone. Everyone has an opinion. They're free to express it as long as it's not overtly harmful to anyone on the call. And then you want to have open dialogue. You want to have leadership presence and participation and sponsorship on these, because if your team is there and your leaders aren't there, then it seems like it's not an important charter for the organization. And then you want to have very lively and active discussion points. So how I really frame these conversations is you want to have a basic check-in. And then you want to ask kind of what's going well in the DEI space within your organization, and where are there some opportunities? And then collectively, how does the group view next steps? Now, one of the caveats to the facilitator piece is you want to make sure that you have trained facilitators. Generally, I recommend external facilitators. However, I do know several of my HR colleagues, such as Tamaya, that's on the call right now, that is a trained facilitator to facilitate these conversations. And I think that's really important, because once you have these conversations, things can go off the rails fairly quickly. And if you don't have a trained facilitator to really get it back to a place where it's constructive and moving forward and helpful, then it could really be worse than not having a conversation at all. So you want to make sure that if you are using your internal teams, that they have been trained in facilitation. Next slide, please. Well, that's not mine, but I'll go ahead with my next slide. Oh, Scott, were you jumping in here?
Yeah, I think, thank you, Tanja. So thank you to the Baumhart Center for the invitation to participate in this critically important discussion. And Tanja, I value every opportunity you and I have had to work alongside one another and partner in the DE&I consulting space. So great to work with you again. I agree with everything Tanja just outlined, and so it's all of that, and I'm going to attempt to build on it a bit. The reason there are so many people here on today's webinar is partly because there's such a desire in our organizations to have dialogue, discussion, conversations, and problem solving. These are the primary words we're hearing: discussion, dialogue, conversations, and problem solving around race and racism. And that desire is fantastic. We applaud that, but a couple cautions. Unless your organization has invested in training and frameworks around, say, courageous conversations, or you have a history of tackling with your managers and leaders issues of such as social justice and nuanced social issues, unless you have trained your managers and leaders and the organization on the fine art of listening and empathy, dialogue, discussion, conversation, and problem solving may be a really big leap on this topic. What we're finding is that for many of us, we don't even know how to listen to one another talk about race and racism at work. And that's across the racial spectrum for us. At work, we've been trained and conditioned to not have these conversations. So as we start this desire of having dialogues and discussions, we're really encouraging people to take time to learn how to listen about race and racism, because we're going to be hearing concepts, perspectives, words around social justice and race and racism that for many of us maybe you've never heard before. So how do we address that? What you see on the right-hand side of the screen are some of the expected outcomes or anticipated outcomes that we're seeing from these sorts of discussions, especially when you're helping people learn how to listen. But beyond outcomes, they may also help you establish a mindset of what it means to even come into the room. So am I willing to deepen my understanding of myself and others? Am I willing to build bridges versus create barriers? Am I willing to heighten my awareness around privilege and the historic, systemic, and institutionalized racism that may exist? If I'm coming to the discussion and I'm not even certain racism is there, or I'm looking to prove my point and let me show how this is really not about building bridges, it's about barriers, I may not be the target audience for this particular discussion. And I think that mindset is important before we go in. On the left-hand side of the screen, you see 4 guidelines that we use as we set these forums up. Tanja, you talked about the first one, about the importance of creating that safe space, that container, which is so critical. And so I'll move to the second, and sharing experiences and perspectives. This is a very specific tip that I'd offer. Before, in many dialogues or conversations, we'd encourage follow-up or clarifying questions. Help me understand, Tanja, what did you mean? Or tell me more about your experience. But as we're learning to listen about race and racism, we're finding that sometimes we're not even ready for that clarifying question step. Sometimes through a facilitated dialogue, simply sharing one another's experience and perspective is all we should be after. And the response can be a simple, thank you. That was powerful. I appreciate you and your story. And that puts us in a position where I don't have to react or respond or endorse a particular point of view, but really gets to the next. It puts me in a position to listen, to deeply understand, and versus react or solve, which I'll come back to in a bit. And finally, leaning into empathy. You know, for many in our organizations, our managers weren't good at empathy before COVID, before work from home, and before this string of events in the last 3 weeks, and they're still struggling with it. So if this is right for you, if we could bounce to the next slide, some additional tips might be, as you see here, consider racially diverse co-facilitation. Tanja, you mentioned the importance of facilitation. Consider having a white and black voice as an example leading these discussions. I would not have agreed to today's forum without partnering by your side, Tanja. And modeling partnership is key. We're not going to get this right. Stumbling is critical, and lean into that. If you're an organization where your culture is every PowerPoint is reviewed 937 times before it's presented and everything is rehearsed, be careful about these conversations. Stumbling, messy is how this is going to play out. On my senior teams at Inquest, listen, this is what we do. This is our day job for 20 years, and we've had conversations we've never had before as a team. Be willing to go where you've not gone. It's not just race. We can't just put things in a neat little compartment. We need to be ready to talk now about politics and policy and religion, because the tentacles of racism are in all of those elements, and we can't uncouple them. And finally, and Tanja, back to you here, be careful of villainization. As we start meeting people where they are and hearing their perspectives and stories, we've got to be really cautious not to villainize folks for coming to the discussion and the table sharing their experiences. We need to address subtle and overt acts of exclusion for sure. We need to be good allies to one another, but be careful of villainization. So Tanja, turn it back to you now to talk about senior team conversations.
Absolutely. Well, now we've had conversation, we see the inequities, we're reading about the inequities. Many of us have lived through these inequities. What can we do? So here's some practical pieces that I work with organizations as they build out their diversity action plans, or however they want to title it. One is leadership development program equity. And I say that because I've worked through this with clients and I've presented on it before, in terms of taking people of different backgrounds and looking at their career trajectory based upon if they have mentorship, if they have sponsorship, if they have the right onboarding, and how those career trajectories can be very different for two individuals that might start on the same exact day. And I've seen this happen in my life in human resources. So it's really important. And I can't tell you the amount of times that I've seen high potential program list without a single person of color, and sometimes without any women. Now, it takes a lot of leadership courage as the HR person to give that list back and say, I need to see other individuals included. Doesn't mean you need to take off anyone, but you need to be inclusive. And I'm not sure if that's been career derailing for me throughout my years or not, but I always have to be authentic to who I am, and that's who I am. I think if your customer base is diverse, if your organization has individuals that are diverse, they deserve an opportunity to be the best that they can be in their careers. Another piece that I talk about is stay interviews. We spend a lot of time on exit interviews, but how can we make sure that we're engaging the individuals that are already within the organization? And in working with companies during this time and even previously, there's a lot of attention around talent acquisition and how do I attract diverse candidates. And then you look in their organization and the employees that they have are not being treated well. And so with stay interviews, you really get to have conversations with individuals to find out what's working well, what's not working well, where there are opportunities, where there are obstacles that could be removed, where there are new ideas that could be activated upon. And so I just love the idea of stay interviews and reinvesting in the people that are making your organization profitable and keeping it going. Also, another area that we've heard a lot about lately and over the years is compensation parity. Are you paying everyone across the organization equitably? And this is the one kind of test that I tell individuals. I always say, if your compensation structure somehow got out within the organization or within the universe, could you explain the differences in compensation from one person to another? If you can't seamlessly and confidently explain those differences, then you have an issue and you need to be looking at that. Because anyone on my team, I could always clearly distinguish why one person was paid more than another, always. And if you don't have the confidence in doing that or the information, then you need to be looking at your compensation and how it's impacting individuals. And we know it tends to impact negatively people of color and women. The other piece is performance and position equity. How are performance reviews being written? If you have a lot of bias around a certain group, it's going to come out during performance review time. And you'll see that individuals who maybe gave more receive a less than stellar performance review, or they don't receive the performance review that they expected. And also position equity. You should also be able to clearly explain why someone's a senior manager versus a manager versus an assistant manager. You should be able to clearly explain why there are position differences and title differences in an organization, because in some larger organizations, position and title absolutely has a clear line to compensation and overall career trajectory. Now, also aligned internal recruitment processes. And when I say internal recruitment, I've heard stories that internal employees of color have had to interview with as many as 21 people for the same job that someone wasn't a person of color met with 3 or 4 people. And why is that? Why was that allowed? Why was the appetite for that even right within an organization? And it's not the first time I've heard it. I've heard it several times. So we have to start looking at how we're treating the people that are currently in our organization so that we can attract individuals of diverse background into the organization and they feel good about they will be treated fairly and equitably and given an equal opportunity within the organization. So there's a lot of information here. It all probably can't be solved in the next 30 or 60 days. But what I would say is don't boil the ocean, but focus on an area that you feel will have the most impact within your organization or has the biggest opportunity for review and correction. And focus on that area. Once again, you can't boil the ocean. The worst thing you can do is put a big old plan out there and don't execute or achieve any of your goals. So you want to make sure that it's something that you are willing to put your stake in the ground in and keep moving forward on. So I also want to say that you don't want to be an organization that makes a bunch of promises that you don't keep in the DEI space. It's really important to keep this alive. I know it's hot right now. People are talking about it. And the biggest drawback that I hear from individuals is, will this be a discussion in August? Right? So we want to make sure we keep the momentum.
I think we may have lost Tanja momentarily, but can we advance to the next slide, Ryan and Scott? We're going to turn it back to you on this, and then we'll make sure to get Tanja's comment when she returns.
Perfect. Thank you, Seth. And I'll just build and pick up right where Tanja was, where she was leaving off, and that's prepare for the long haul, especially at the senior teams as you're having these conversations. I've been honored to be at a lot of these discussions about the messaging and commitments that are being shared in the organizations, and the energy and the passion that's gone into those conversations have been truly phenomenal. Remember that you're going to need that energy if we're going to truly work to make meaningful progress and work to be as anti-racist in our organizations as we can be. This is not over by a memo or a position statement. 6 months, a year, 3 years from now, we still have to be committed. I'm going to add to a couple of Tanja's comments. The number of times in 23 years I've had true debates about whether or not organizations should publish their representation numbers. Folks, let's take the veil off of this. We need to see where your people are. And do you not think we're not counting the number of women, people of color, LGBT, people with disabilities on these Zoom meetings? Let's be transparent with where we are by level with our representation numbers so we can help hold ourselves accountable. Tanja mentioned the pay equity work. We have proven that we can make progress with women in corporate America and in our nonprofits doing gender pay equity studies. There's no reason we should not be applying those same principles and learnings and progress for our communities of color in our organization. To me, this is table stakes if you're serious about DE&I. At the risk of irritating some of the folks who hire us, I'm going to speak to my HR and legal colleagues who may be on this call. This is a new day. We cannot assume that you've got it all figured out in the HR and legal professions. Make sure we're investing in you because new skills, competencies are going to be needed. And one example for the folks in the legal field, we rely on you to protect our organizations from risk. It's a critical, important job. But we've got to be mindful that the risks that you're protecting us from may be the very same things that are helping keep systemic racism alive in our organization. A lot of our HR and corporate policies are built on equality, treating everyone exactly the same versus principles of equity. So we need to lean into that. And HR professionals, we need you to be skilled in being anti-racist, and what does that mean? And finally, just so you think I'm not telling everybody else what to do, watch White Fixing. No less than 4 times in the last 3 weeks has one of my senior team members, and this is where representation matters, Gloria Cotton, and when she leans back and is quiet in her chair, it's when I know to really listen. When she's said to me and stopped me in our meetings and said, Scott, it's a great idea, but don't you think we should talk to some Black people before you move forward with that? 4 times. We've got to watch Solving For. The disability community has an incredible saying called nothing about us without us. I think we need to apply that same principle here, that we shouldn't be fixing or solving without partnership at the table, engaged together. So it's my parting comment, Seth. Back to you.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you again to Tanja, who I know is getting back online right now so she can be with us for Q&A. We are going to move on from expertise to case studies because we've shared a lot with you, and I imagine many of you are still wondering, how do I operationalize this and how do I make choices amidst the many important priorities? And so there are 3 organizations that we admire that are making those types of decisions. And we've asked leaders from those organizations and companies to share their stories. And we're going to start with Tamaya Arel, who is the Vice President of Human Resources, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at United Way of Metro Chicago, where she oversees all workforce planning, talent and performance management, employee relations, and compensation and benefits administration. So everything they've just described in terms of where we need to move the needle, Tamaya has a key role in. Prior to joining United Way, she spent over 20 years developing and honing her passion for human resources, beginning her career in the not-for-profit sector at Thresholds, and then she went on in business in for-profit, including in retail at Target, healthcare, and in insurance at CNA Financial. Tamaya?
Thank you, Seth. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate you and your team inviting me to join the panel today. It's always a pleasure when I can get to work with my good friend Tanja Coleman, and pleasure to meet all of the other panelists. Next slide, I want to just go ahead and jump right into our information. So as Seth introduced me, I am working for the United Way, and hopefully everyone has heard of us. We are the largest not-for-profit. Our network is one of the largest not-for-profits in the world. Each United Way is locally managed, and we are focused on local communities in the region. We raise about $50 million annually through corporate and individual donations, and we partner with over 200 agencies and about 100 corporations to ensure our mission, which is to fight for the health, education, financial stability, and safety of every person in neighborhoods across the region. Next slide, please. Over the past few weeks, we watched, just as all of you did, the disturbing and increasingly hateful and racist events that were happening across the country, from Ahmaud Arbery to Breonna Taylor, and ultimately George Floyd. It was just too much coming at us way too fast. And we knew as an organization, we did not want to remain silent. Our president and CEO, Sean Garrett, also felt strongly that we would not remain silent, and he issued a statement. The statement, as you see it here, was released during the weekend of major unrest here in the city of Chicago. And you'll see that in part, it just reads that we are pledging to work together to find solutions to the issues of housing and economic development and institutional racism in our communities. We are hoping that we, as an organization, can learn and understand how to address these issues to make all of our neighborhoods that we work with better in our region. Next slide, please. So long before the recent events, and shortly after Sean and I joined the organization, we recognized that there were internal conversations already happening with our teams. We decided that we wanted to make sure that we did focus on racial equity with our internal staff, and we're committed to creating tangible and internal actions through the work of our committee. Next slide, please. So we have an internal committee that is formed, and right now the committee does hold about 20 to 25 staff members, but it is open to all. And essentially, our Racial Equity Committee engages in critical dialogue around race and politics that disproportionately impact communities of color. We hold meetings monthly, and we try to make sure that we are discussing topical information. The committee is also ensuring that the organization addresses racial disparities that affect our internal team and processes, our internal culture, as well as how we raise and disperse funding for our neighbors. That's something that we've just recently started to really focus on, and we're looking to build and execute both our internal and external strategies. I think Tanja mentioned earlier that organizations should be building their plans or action plans or work plans or whatever they're calling it. And we are currently doing that same process right now. It's also important to note that our committee is open to all staff, and the membership is represented by all levels in the organization, including our president and CEO, who is a committed and active member of the committee. So when he comes to join, he doesn't join as CEO, he joins as a member of United Way and participates in those conversations, which sometimes can be difficult, but we feel is truly helpful to moving this conversation forward. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that we've been on a journey, and what you see here are just a few of the things that we've been doing as a committee in the organization internally. We rebirthed the Racial Equity Committee. It was called something different, but we've essentially rebirthed it and tried to recreate it. And through that, we did receive commitment from our executive team. With Sean being at the head of the organization, it was important to him and important to our senior team to see this as a valuable asset to our organization and one a commitment that we needed to focus on to improve not only how we work internally and how we communicate and learn from each other, but also as it helps to shape and formulate what we're going to do in terms of our internal strategies in the neighborhoods that we serve. We initially started with educational activities, and I was looking at the calendar, and it was about this time last year, it was over the summer, that we actually held a screening of the documentary series, of the documentary 13th. And we invited the whole staff. We took over a conference room on a Friday, and we invited staff to join. We watched the entire movie, and we did set some parameters that people were free to join, but they are also free to leave because the content could be heavy. We ordered pizza and to make it relaxing. It was a Friday afternoon. But even after the documentary, we held a 90-minute debrief and session where the staff were just able to share in a safe space the feelings and comments about what they had just witnessed. The feedback that we received from staff who did attend was that it was powerful for them to be able to do that in an office setting. Some couldn't believe that we had actually done that. I had also talked to some peers that couldn't believe we had done that in the office, but we felt it was important to offer that opportunity for our staff to do that. We also heard feedback from staff that had never heard of some of the incidents that had been discussed in the documentary. So we overall felt that, that was a win, that if we could at least expose our staff to more information, that was a huge first step for us. Later on in the year, we also had another screening session where we invited a guest to come in and discuss the immigration situation in the States right now and how that had been evolving. Other issues or other activities that you can see that we have been focused on throughout the year, the past 18 months. This past January, we did participate in the National Day of Racial Healing, and we were able to host healing circles at our organization. Myself and one of my colleagues, Jose Rico, are trained facilitators to be able to hold circles, and we did so at our organization, and it was truly great to bring that to our staff. We also have a racial equity newsletter that we send out quarterly, often sharing information, educational resources, and media and book and film, things that people can use to try to increase their knowledge about equality and race. We also refurbished a library and a communications corner. Unfortunately, because we're remote, we don't have access to the actual physical books that are there, but we do have a physical library where staff can come and take books and publications. We have a couple copies of the 1619 Project there for people to come, and we also have a wall where we post various articles and information that people can read and share. Partnering with those, with the library and the communications, we are hosting those drop-in chat sessions and happy hours or breakfast. We try to do in at different times of the day to invite people to join. And the point of those sessions is to give our staff an opportunity to talk about a new book that they read or talk about a documentary that they may have seen with not only Black staff, but other white staff who may not have had the opportunity and are looking to just increase their knowledge and grow. Just recently, with the events that have happened with George Floyd, we did feel that it was important to offer an open, safe space for our team to talk. And so we had an open lunch and learn where we did discuss the recent protests. Obviously, it was held on Zoom, and we also did breakout rooms within the Zoom session to allow for smaller group discussions. It was just to allow people to really talk about what was happening. It was obviously affecting people, people's ability to concentrate, people's ability to work. I myself was having that issue as well because things were just happening so fast, and we really wanted to offer that space to allow staff to do that. And just recently, we had an executive team panel at one of our remotely united sessions, which is what we've entitled our open town halls. And this was a session where we invited our members of our executive team who are persons of color to come forth and share how the recent events have been affecting them. We thought that we'd start with the senior team to give the staff an opportunity to see that even though we may have these high-level leadership positions, we are living in the same world that everyone else is, and these things are impacting us just as they would be impacting our team. We're currently working through the feedback from those sessions, and we hope to create a series moving forward where we can invite more people to join and be able to share their experiences. Next slide, please. In doing that, we want to make sure that we are providing professional resources for our staff. We understand that this is very heavy information and it may be hard for people to process. And so we're making sure that that information is being shared with them regularly through our EAP services and other resources that we may become aware of. As I mentioned, we're hoping to create a panel discussion or panel series going forward to keep these conversations open and continuing so that we are discussing these long after August and that we're continuing them as we're working, because this is a part of our work. It should be a part of our work, and we can't continue to move forward and keep it siloed in its own category. Part of that moving forward is just to create and provide training on bias and avoiding microaggressions. I may be contacting some of our panelists to help us move forward with that because I think it's good to have external people come in as well to do that with your staff. And ultimately, we're doing all this because we want to make sure that we find that we're committing to finding ways to complete our mission in more equitable ways. Thank you very much. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tamaya. And we're now going to move from a nonprofit that has as its core this mission of fighting poverty and building a more just future to a for-profit that is in the agency space And we're going to hear from Shalane Walker. Shalane is the Associate Media Director at Wavemaker, where she currently manages media data, campaign optimizations, and reporting processes for the 2020 US Census account. She has extensive experience in media strategy and integrated marketing communications, having managed media plans and executed strategies across 3 Fortune 50 companies. She is a leader who has helped move the needle on DEI at the companies and agencies where she has worked, including serving as a key thought partner and leader at Wavemaker. And I will say, most of all to us, she is a rising Baumhart Scholar who we are so proud of and in awe of her leadership. So Shalane, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Seth, for that warm introduction. So as Seth said, I work at Wavemaker, which is a media, content, and technology communications agency under the WPP advertising agency. And if any of you have seen any episode of Mad Men, you know the advertising industry came from a long way, but also still has a really long way to go. And as he said, I work on the US Census, so I don't have a D&I role, but D&I is something that's been important to me since I began my career. So I just wanted to share and speak from the heart some of the things that I've seen in my company in the past few years. One thing is that we are about positively provoking growth, and our CEO, our company value says that that requires uncomfortable change. In fact, one of our tenets is actually that I am confident I am allowed to shake things up, and if we are going to turn over a system that's been in place for so long, then shaking things up is exactly what we need to do. I was able to work on a mentorship, diverse mentorship proposal, speaking to what Scott and Tanja said earlier about really including equitable access to resources, to networks, and opportunities. It doesn't always happen with informal mentoring. I had a chance to present this a couple of weeks ago to our C-suite and executive leadership team, and it was approved on the spot. It was a really great day. I actually wrote about it on LinkedIn. And one thing I loved is I no longer had to make the case for why we needed a diverse mentorship program, why the agency needed to put resources towards this. People were finally understanding that like any goal, like any KPI, it requires, as we say in the faith-based community, your time, your talent, and your treasure. All of the people leaders here just recognize that this is not something that's not going to come without hard work. Another aspect of this is the employee resource group. Within Wavemaker, our employee resource group is called Melanin. And sadly, a lot of times we're only called on once a year to plan the Black History Month activity, even though there's so much more we're doing behind the scenes. Our amazing CEO, Amanda Richmond, actually gave us the opportunity 2 weeks ago to speak to our entire company across all 7 offices in the US and speak to who we are, what we're doing, and why we're doing it, and really, again, facilitating that conversation and letting people know that we're here to support, and we're here for allyship and to build those connections across our company. As a follow-up to that session, we actually had a town hall similar to what was mentioned earlier. However, in our town hall, we had a very specific goal. We wanted to make Wavemaker a safe space to call out microaggressions and racial bias without fear of retaliation. And so we asked our agency to come to a work session. It was an hour and a half. It was not mandatory. And we actually had more than 200 of our employees, again, including our CEO, our chief talent officer, our executive directors, join us and write out a SMART goal, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound, to help us achieve this objective. It was amazing to see the collaboration across so many different people, everyone feeding in, bringing their great ideas. And again, realizing this isn't one person's job on the DEI team, bringing diversity and inclusion. It's really about our whole agency coming together and everyone taking individual responsibility for what they can do. So, late last week, yes, it was a very busy week. We also had a Courageous Conversations, which is really actually an hour and a half lesson where we learn, a lot of the company learned the history of the Black struggle and civil rights. At first, I didn't fully understand why we were dedicating time to this versus addressing some of the issues. However, as people started asking questions about things like redlining, Juneteenth, I realized that there's no way we can undo systemic racism if people don't know the history of systemic racism. And then last but certainly not least, a couple of weeks ago, like many companies, our global CEOs sent out an email about Black Lives Matter and included some socially insensitive comments in the email itself. Now, a couple weeks ago, I probably wouldn't have said anything. It would have been like, my voice won't matter. It won't change anything. There are bigger battles. However, my company had really encouraged me that your voice matters on the big things and on the small things. So I took the time. It was my first time ever emailing the global CEO. And I told him that his email is sensitive, and I told him how it personally hurt me. I was very pleasantly surprised. He actually responded back right away, responded back personally, apologized, and invited me to be a part of the global D&I task force, exactly to what Scott said earlier, making sure that you're including a wide range of perspectives and voices as you're rolling out policies and changes across the company. And I had our first session last week for an hour where we were able to just talk about my vision for Wavemaker and what that means for our D&I policy, not just in the US, not just in our UK headquarters, but around the entire globe. So I was really excited to have that opportunity. And so for people leaders on the call, I would say if you want race and racism to be something that you talk about at work, you start with leading by example. Our CEO sent a few really great emails. The one I loved was that she said he is in this for the long haul and has a long-term commitment to it. And the second was that you see something, say something. Again, giving us the space, giving us the permission, and encouraging us that Wavemaker is a space where our voices, matter, and our voices can be heard. And of course, I have a lot of other ideas as well. I want to make sure I hand it over to Melanie. But check with me on LinkedIn. We can talk more.
Thank you so much, Shalane. And I just want to say that, there's so many young professionals on this call wondering how they can be a force within their companies, even if they're not in the C-suite. And you are such an exceptional role model to them of how you can be a leader and truly move the needle. So thank you. And we're going to go to another leader, Melanie Munoz, who by day is the manager of strategic partnerships and a senior consultant at the Kaleidoscope Group. But by night is leading Prospanica Chicago, an association of Latinx professionals, and also leading a ministry of over 400 plus faith-focused Chicago young professionals. Melanie was part of putting out a really powerful statement on behalf of the association Prospanica, and we were really pleased to invite her to share her story and the team story in putting that out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah, I probably my colleagues across the panel, we have not slept in a couple of weeks, but wanted to share, if we can go to the next slide, with Prospanica Chicago. So just if you have no familiarity with our organization, we are a member-based organization that is a national organization. So there are about 44 chapters across the country. And so I want to speak to young professionals as well as associations, ERG leaders, D&I task force folks. We took our opportunity, and this statement came out, and if you would like to take a closer look, you can check out our website, but we really wanted to take a strong stance. And so we were really clear in our statement to specifically say Black and not people of color. As an organization that we primarily address the Latinx community, we wanted to stand in solidarity with our Black community and really stand in solidarity by not including us because we have our issues, we have our things, but we really wanted to say, all that aside, Black Lives Matter. And how do we, like we had sentiments earlier today, not boil the ocean, but really how do we take our stance as a leader in the business professional space? And so if we want to go to the next slide, I can show you kind of how we got to our statement. So essentially, I'll be honest, even though I do diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I'm the president of this organization, I allowed my team to develop the statement. I reviewed it, but I wanted my team's voice to be heard and also to have an open dialogue. So if anyone is in that space of what should we say, a holiday's coming up, a unfortunate event just like the murder of George Floyd happened, and we need to make a statement, how do we do that? For us, we really wanted to have an open dialogue around where we were with the statement itself and where key stakeholders needed to be voicing their opinion. Secondary, revisit your mission. So our mission specifically is to empower Latinx professionals to achieve their educational, economic, and social potential. None of those things are successful for our community if first the Black community isn't served the way that we need to stand in solidarity with. And so for us as a community and a board, we really wanted to make sure that this was a pointed communication effort and that we would have actions moving forward. We wanted to collaborate, so collaboration was key. And second to last, we wanted three things to be really clear. We wanted to be expressive and share our heart behind really where we want to go as an organization as it relates to these social issues. Two, be explicit. As I mentioned, we didn't use the word people of color. We specifically said Black community. And we also wanted to be explicit and specific because this was coming off a very specific weekend here in Chicago where the Latinx community and the Black community were having issues in areas like Pilsen and Little Village. And there was really a division becoming rather than the solidarity movement. And then lastly, we wanted to provide a call to action. And for us, just as Tanja said earlier, we know we can't boil the ocean, but we knew as an organization that we can address our issues, we can address our professionals and our members, and that as leaders in the Latinx, Latino community, that we have some things to address as it relates to social justice and racial equity. And part of that is addressing anti-Blackness and colorism in the Latinx community. And so I have to give a huge shout out to my team because we are now following up with multiple different efforts around Juneteenth and supporting Black businesses because we are still a business organization, but what's our impact in empowering the Black dollar and ultimately providing resources around, first off, in English and in Spanish so that that communication is widely distributed, but also sharing just how we can make a change because there are issues even in our subgroup as Latinos, our Latinx community, and we wanted to be sure to address those issues. And then just like Shalane, you know, we actually had a national statement that was published and it didn't reflect what was going on here in Chicago. I'll just keep it at that. And so we collectively, along with a lot of major other cities across our membership base, came together and we actually challenged the statement that was released nationally. And now it has gone into a really great opportunity for our organization to invest in a social justice institute. So now across the country, our organization will be investing in that. And that was through just highlighting and giving feedback around if we're going to have this conversation, then we need to be a part of the conversation. So I encourage any young professional, association leaders, or ERGs, don't stay quiet on these topics. It's important for you to share and to get your feedback to the right people because, to be honest, a lot of folks don't know what they don't know. So if you have that energy and insight, feel free to share. Pass it back to you, Seth.
Thank you so much, Melanie. And as everyone saw in the chat box, we really do want to get to your questions. And so I'm going to invite our panelists to come back on with their video and their voice. And we're going to go to 10 minutes of questions. I know many people may have to exit this webinar at the scheduled time, which is right now. But for those who can continue, we want to make sure we're answering questions that you all have been sending throughout this time. So the first question I want to address is one that we got repeats of, and essentially the big idea is this is someone who's in an organization, they see opportunities for DEI to be moved forward, but they don't feel like leadership is truly committed on this topic. Do you have suggestions for them about how they start the conversation, about what their expectations can be, and about how they set ultimately accountability around their own role over time in an organization where they're not feeling that kind of leadership? And maybe Tanja, because we are lucky to have you back on, we can start with you and then we can go across the panel.
Yes, I want to say, first of all, for all the folks in the chat that have questions, know that Scott and I and the DEI space folks and everyone on this call, but more importantly than not, we're all collaborating because I don't think any one person has all the ideas, regardless of how long you've been in the business. So we oftentimes call each other, lean on each other. So it's not a competition, although we have different consulting firms, we really work collaboratively together to find the best solution for our clients and the best solution for when we put these lunch and learns together. But I think one of the ways to really engage leaders, right now in this space, I think what you'll find is most leaders will put the face on of caring, but it really goes back to the action points and holding them accountable to those. And I think building the business case for diversity, we've discussed this for so many years. I think now it's come to fruition. People understand the business case for diversity. They understand some of the elements that needs to happen, even though they might not be completely married to it. The thing that will get them married to it is holding them accountable for the results and holding them accountable to, like I said, don't boil the ocean, pick one or two things that you can actively move on, have conversation on frequently. I think that's the best way to get leaders on board, because inherently, like any one of us psychologically, we like to see wins. We like to see ourselves moving forward and accomplishing things. And before you know it, they'll turn into a champion. I've seen it happen so many times with leaders that I've worked with. And you really just have to just keep it in the forefront of the business and what they're trying to do.
And Seth,
yeah.
if I can take that, I would say before all this started, my first experience with D&I at Wavemaker was there was an industry panel at 45 panelists, 2 women and no people of color. I emailed the panel, told them there was a problem, gave me tickets, so I had to go to my boss, tell her what I had done. I did feel very nervous, so I definitely understand that feeling of leadership get it. I don't think they get it. Will there be repercussions? I want to give you the confidence to use your voice, as Tanja said. Know that your voice is powerful, and know that despite what you see, we live in a society where there are rules and there are HR is there to help. HR is there. There's so many stories now that have hopefully encouraged you as well. And so it just starts with you and you speaking up and you building those allies and finding those allies within your company. So there's probably a lot of your coworkers who may feel the same way. And with your voices together, you guys can impact leadership, because even if they haven't been listening before, you cannot be a leader of a Fortune 100, Fortune 500 company in this day and time and not have your eyes attuned to the D&I needs within your organization.
Yeah, and just
This is Tamaya. I want to, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I would also just say, while you are using your voice, bring solutions as well. Be a part of the change. And I think that all of us can speak to that of, I have seen so many times where someone has spoken up and now they're in the D&I role themselves. And so if you have a voice and a passion for it, definitely drive it. It does take work. And so if you can provide solutions as well, that's always really incredible for leaders, because if they're not doing something, it might be because they don't know what they're doing, but also the accountability piece is really helpful as someone who's in the organization and cares about the organization, just as yourself.
Tamaya, you are a head of HR, and we've been talking about that as a key leader in this and giving people space. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Right. So I was going to piggyback off of what Melanie said to bring solutions, but also I would recommend that for someone who finds themselves in an organization where they're feeling like D&I isn't supportive, I would encourage them to be courageous. And I know from my point of view that may sound like a huge, like just easy to do, but I think the more people can use their voice, like Shalane said, use her voice, even though she didn't really know what to expect and didn't know what was going to happen after a result of that. But look at what it got her. Like, you never know what can happen if you speak up. Someone may be waiting for you because they don't have the voice, because they don't really know what to say or what to do. But I encourage you to be courageous and be the squeaky wheel. Keep bringing it up. And right now, I think this is a perfect time to seize the moment. Everybody's talking about it. It's on everybody's mind, and this is the time to get things started. Even if you don't know exactly how to do it, like Tanja said, we all are partnering together, we're working together, we're collaborating together. We're all building the plane as we're flying it, so no one knows this thing 100%. So keep bringing it up, be the squeaky wheel, and seize the moment to try to get something jump-started in your organization.
Scott, anything to add to the other panelists?
So supportive of everything I just heard. One addition, don't let your leaders be a legend in their own minds. Part of the reason they're not moving forward often with DE&I efforts is they consciously think they're inclusive. I've got it for everybody. We don't have an issue. We don't have a problem. Give them data points and let them hear the stories. Do you want people feeling this way on your watch? Is this the legacy you want to leave as a leader? Is one path, not the path for everyone, but one path that could open the door.
So we also received a number of questions about how you recommend that people work on this on an individual level. This question writes, we need to fight racism on two fronts, structure and systems, and in individuals. What are things we can do to teach people to speak up on behalf of colleagues, especially of color, and check their own biases? How can we model that behavior at work? And I know this is a broader conversation about, you know, how do we be upstanders and be allies? But I'm curious, particularly in a work environment, how you recommend to do that with colleagues in a way that is, you know, effective and courageous at the same time.
I'll start. So with our town hall, what we started that town hall with was we actually shared stories of bias and discrimination. And what we said, and it was again a lot of emotional labor for our employees of color, but we realized that a lot of employees, to Scott's point, had no idea this was happening or had no idea what it might feel like to have those microaggressions. And so I would encourage you, if you're able to start with that, with collecting those stories, sharing them anonymously, and then having that safe space facilitated by an external company or with someone who's trained in that, I find that is a great space to start, because once people are educated, a lot of times that's the first step.
Yeah, I'll add to that. The notion of being an ally is absolutely critical. And as a member of the LGBTQ community, I know I've benefited personally and professionally by having allies advocate for our causes. This is an opportunity in this moment to use some of those same principles to make sure all of our communities are allied with the particular community that right now needs a lot of attention, and that's our Black community. So I think we can build on a lot of things that we may have known in other spaces and reapply them appropriately here. Not that it's not a one-for-one comparison, but there are some of those skills of being an ally and speaking up courageously that are universal in the workplace. And we can teach that, and we can learn from one another. And the last thing I'll say is ask questions. How can I be an ally for you? Ask. Don't feel like you always have to have the answer. How can I be an ally for you in this moment?
Tanja?
Yeah, I'll just follow up with, there's a lot of little things that we don't have to make big splashes in the water about, right? We hear conversations. Oftentimes HR is part of these conversations, and it's really important that HR speak up when they hear these little indiscretions that blow over in talent debriefing meetings and succession planning meetings. So-and-so will not work well with a woman, or will not work well with a person of color. These sorts of things are actually said. And it's incumbent upon all of us to be courageous right now. I think to Maya's point, now is the time you can be courageous, and it's expected. And so a lot of the little microaggressions and unconscious bias, and Scott, you said once, sometimes it's no longer unconscious, it's very conscious, right? You are consciously making these decisions. And so it's important that we step in and step up, all of us, regardless of level. And sometimes I think people get stuck on level too. It's not really about level, it's about what are you doing individually when you hear things that are inappropriate. What are you doing in the moment to correct them, or having a conversation afterwards if you're too emotionally charged at that point to have the conversation? Are you addressing it, or are you brushing it off and leaving it to someone else? So it's incumbent upon all of us to be activators. We're all activists in our own way. We don't have to be part of an organization to be an activist. We can be an activist every single day that we step out of our homes, but not so much now, or onto our computers.
Well, so final words from Melanie and Tamaya. Melanie, you go first, and we'll get final word from Tamaya.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just sentiments across the board is that this is a journey, and many organizations just left the starting line of this marathon. And so part of the things that we are sharing with our clients is really just what are you putting your hands to? Like Tandra was saying, like there's an ocean to boil, but what can you do? And I would say holding organizations accountable is definitely one side from a systemic area, but also as an individual, I loved everything that was shared because we ourselves can make such a great impact. And as allies of people that are maybe not Black or not people of color or whatever dimension it might be, sometimes you as an ally being able to speak up for inappropriate behavior goes volumes because you are part of that same community and you are able to speak to your counter white male or female or whatever it might be, so that that information is communicated across. But also, you know, there are different channels, and sometimes leadership in HR, if somebody claims that an issue happened to them specifically, that's taken into account. But if another individual also puts their voice in and says, actually, I witnessed this encounter and I wasn't okay with it, that speaks volumes. And honestly, with allyship, sometimes it's you stepping in and also knowing when to step back and leverage other voices as well. So just keeping that balance.
Tamaya, you have our final word.
Oh, no pressure, Seth. But thank you. I agree with what my co-panelists have stated. I think a parting word would just be for everyone to build this thing brick by brick. And I think that the model that we chose, or that we are choosing right now at United Way, is educate. We want to educate as much as we can. Through educating our staff and teams, they are able to take that information and hopefully share it and implement it. And it won't be easy to do that, but to be consciously aware and consistent with doing that, to educate and to share, so that eventually change can start to happen either in behavior or processes. And then also speaking on allyship, we are currently thinking about how we can help our staff be an ally, not only just in our internal work, but also externally. But to do that, you have to allow for people as they're learning to feel safe in sharing. So, you know, you don't want people to think that they're going to get, you know, beat up on if they say the wrong thing. Truly, if it's genuine and how they're approaching it. So just providing that safe space for people to learn and to become better allies, I think is going to help move the needle and move the process that we need to have these race conversations in the workplace and make them more fruitful and make them more productive.
Well, we began by talking about how this issue is more than 400 years old, and it is ultimately one of the true horrors of our society. And you all have provided, I mean, deep insight, and you've spent your careers trying to make us a better country and make us better businesses and make us better people. And so I just want to close by saying thank you. Your work is essential, and we are grateful for your leadership and having the opportunity to share your voices with our audience, and hope that the businesses out there will hear and listen and ultimately leverage so that we can move forward. Thank you to all those, and there are over 200 of you who have stayed with us this entire time, well beyond the scheduled time. And thanks to our panelists for what have been truly insightful remarks. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.